Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to do an overall market update and discuss something that I've started to see taking place in October that frankly isn't all too surprising to me, but based on kind of what I've been hearing from just people on Twitter and people I've talked to kind of in real life and all this type of stuff, I'm a little bit surprised that more people kind of aren't tuned into this. And so what I want to talk about is kind of the whole theory surrounding Uptober, right? I mean a lot of people, I'm sure if any of you have been on crypto Twitter recently or anything like that, you've seen a lot of oh, it's Uptober, we're going to go crazy in the month of October because that's just what happens, right? And usually that's whenever there's something that's just matter of fact like that, I always have this concern, or I guess this doubt that is actually going to happen, right? And the thing that's a little bit surprising to me about it is we literally just went through this in the month of September. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit more about that and kind of just give an overall state of the market and update on where things are at so far. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive right in. So starting out, what we can see is we've got the crypto fear and greed index. We were kind of settling out on neutral for at least a little bit, but we have kind of dipped back into fear. This is kind of because, Bitcoin has started to show a little bit of price weakness. If we do look at the chart here, we can see, we've kind of started to break a little bit of the bullish structure that we were showing. We did have kind of a higher high being made here. We did have, I guess maybe you could call this a higher low. Maybe we're still calling this a low, but ultimately we're pulling back, but we did see kind of a lower local high here. Maybe on more of a macro sense, maybe we continue to pull back kind of down to this range. What I had said over the past several weeks is, maybe we see it kind of level out here, which it has seemed to do at least so far, but there is the possibility that, the potentially pull back down to this level. Again, as I've mentioned for now months, I do think there is a slight possibility that we do kind of dip into this region just because it is a region of relatively high liquidity. I'm definitely not married to that idea just because I do realize that that's not necessarily a guarantee because of some of the more bullish things that are happening, as well as we draw closer to the election. I think a lot of what's happening is there's just a general sense of well, let's wait and see what happens with the election. And so I don't really expect too many crazy moves to one side or the other, and doing something like this before the election, I would kind of consider a crazy move. So kind of the closer we get, the less likely I do think that this is. But who knows, kind of depending on who wins the election, we might see kind of a panic sell down to this level. I would say that would be particularly if Kamala wins. Frankly, I don't think it matters ultimately. I know there is kind of a large sense that, people are concerned that if Kamala wins, crypto's so over, and if Trump wins, crypto's going to go to $1 million a coin or whatever. I don't know. I just don't think any legitimate industry is really built off of who wins the next election. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe it's going to cause some short-term issues, but long-term, if crypto truly is legitimate, it's not going to matter. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Overall, where we're at here, obviously we're kind of just ranging between these kind of levels of support and resistance in here. We kind of see them interact with all of them, fairly recently. So nothing too crazy is going on. We can see that volume has kind of started to lower at least a little bit, kind of from what we've seen, at least a couple months back. But overall, we're maintaining a decent chunk of volume. If we look at open interest, we can see kind of a similar story. If this is back in 2020, so if we pull back, these are kind of the depths of the bear market. We have seen kind of since the beginning of this year a pretty decent rise in open interest. I do think a lot of this is coupled with some of the ETFs that we've been seeing. People are looking to have various hedging alternatives to kind of as more institutions get involved within Bitcoin, they're looking for more financial instruments to kind of hedge and reduce some of the volatility that they have on their crypto positions. And so I think that is part of the reason that we have seen open interest increase. But we've held pretty well overall, even with price kind of not doing a whole lot, the open interest has stayed relatively consistent. I would imagine as price continues to go up, we'll probably see something similar like this again. At this point we were seeing peaks of about 36 billion. Right now I think we're 33 billion, so only 10% off kind of what we were seeing as all-time highs for open interest. I would imagine that maybe this number doubles or triples as we get more institutional eyes and adoption, and there kind of becomes a frenzy around this type of stuff if crypto does kind of start to take off. That's kind of my guess. It's hard to say for certain, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. Looking back at the chart, we can see, even though as price has come down, we have we've held price pretty well. We've held volume relatively well. Open interest is held. So overall, like, this is one of the things that I know I've mentioned before on the channel, but like, it's a little bit surprising to me that people are so scared about where things are at. Bitcoin looking pretty good. If we go back to Ethereum, honestly, Ethereum's probably looking the worst of the bunch, if we're being honest. Still, I think it's up for the year if we're looking at, kind of where we were. I guess this was beginning of January, was in here. So yeah, I mean, we're up for the year. Not great, not like a great amount, but well, I guess maybe we're actually probably pretty close to break even on the year if we were to actually look, because I think we were up in this range. So yeah, we're relatively close to break even. But I mean, we did see a pretty massive run up, and then we have seen a pretty steep pullback, of course. How we kind of continue to see Ethereum perform, I think that depends. I'm actually at a crypto conference this week. I'll come out with probably a video or two discussing some of the things that have kind of been the main topics of conversation. But one of the bigger ones is like huge polarization around both Ethereum and its ecosystem, as well as Solana and its ecosystem. There's a lot of people who are massively bullish on Solana, and they think that Solana is just going to beat Ethereum because it's better tech. It was kind of a later iteration, and so it kind of got to learn from some of Ethereum's mistakes as far as like scaling was concerned and whatnot. And Ethereum right now is still kind of trying to figure out how to scale and the best way to do that. They've kind of taken the layer 2 route, and obviously we haven't seen how that's going to work out, but there's a lot of polarization. There's a bunch of people who think Ethereum's scaling solution is the best thing since sliced bread, and it's going to do super well and whatnot. And then there's others who think that Ethereum has lost, and it's really just a matter of time, kind of figuring out that has actually happened, and Salon is the one that will win out. And so obviously Ethereum not looking super great on the year. If we look at Solana, similar type of thing to Bitcoin, actually, is it's done really quite well. We can see that 2024 started out about right here. Obviously pretty decent run up before 2024. We actually saw kind of a ridiculous run up from about middle of October to the end of the year. And then even still starting out in the year, we did continue to make moves up, and then we've kind of consolidated in this zone up here. This to me looks really, really good overall. We've put a decent chunk of volume, in above kind of these 130, like 120 to 130 ranges. And so I think this is looking really good for, a potential really large next move up. If we were to kind of zoom this out very, very like long time scale, we can see a couple of things. This kind of is this like liquidity zone. So if we were to draw like kind of a big box, we could see a couple of different things. Like this, to me, looks like what we would see is the main like liquidity area that we're seeing. And so if we were to go and kind of do a little bit of bouncing around in here, let me find what I'm looking for. Bounce, whatever. But then like once we break through this like 260, well, it's probably more like 250 range. I mean, we've got a really like large area for price discovery, like we've seen kind of before in the past. The first Solana run up, obviously we went from $1 to like 200. And so, obviously a pretty nice move up here. When we look, and obviously we've seen consolidation in this area, and then we went from about 20 to again back to about 200 here. This wasn't a ton of consolidationary phase, but again, about 20 to 200. So I think if we can kind of hold and then break out of this, we could be seeing a pretty nice move up. Where to exactly, it's hard to say. Looking at like market cap of Ethereum versus market cap of Solana, we could potentially, see something happening. What we've heard about a lot in the past is, kind of the flippening. That's typically been referred to Ethereum flipping Bitcoin. I think kind of all hopes and aspirations of that actually happening, at least within this cycle, are kind of off. But I do think something that is possible to look at is potentially the flippening of Ethereum and Solana, and maybe Solana takes the spot as kind of the second largest ecosystem, particularly since when you look at the fundamental data, Solana is performing actually really quite well. And so I do think that's something that maybe isn't necessarily like the most like common or like most probable outcome, but I do think it is an outcome that is possible. So anyway, that's something that I'm kind of keeping my eye on as we kind of develop throughout this cycle. But that's kind of how things are looking. As you can see, I do most of my charting through Margex. If you are interested, you can feel free to check out my link in the description below. You don't need a KYC. You also don't need a VPN, and you can trade leverage up to 100x. As you can see, I do basically all my charting here. I mainly just trade Bitcoin just because this is kind of what I'm most familiar with. But obviously, if you have something that you're wanting to trade, there's a whole list of things that you can trade here. I also have recently partnered with WEEX as well. WEEX has been a software that I've actually, or a trading platform that I've really liked also. They also do spot trading. So if you're not looking to do leverage, just because, leverage is very, very risky. So, always please remember that if you decide that's something you want to do, leverage can be very, very, very risky. And so WEEX is nice because if you kind of want to stay without leverage and not take that risk, you can just trade spot, which is really cool. So anyway, both of those links are in the description below. If you want to do that, obviously that helps me out a lot. If not, like I said, please, don't be trading leverage if you're not feeling comfortable to do that. So anyway, moving on, I want to go back to what we've, we're returning back to the liquidation maps because it has been pretty consistent for us so far. We are back in a state of confluence between all three of the charts. It's not as lopsided as I would usually like to see, but this is something where, maybe I'll potentially look at taking a trade. Again, given, we did just look at the chart, but given that we've seen so much kind of ranging, especially short term, let's actually just look at this really quick. I'll actually move down to the hourly so we can see this. But what we can see is obviously a pretty decent chunk of ranging. There is an overall downside bias, but I mean, we've kind of been moving pretty decently in both directions. And so if I were to take, a leverage trade, I think it would be on pretty low leverage just because we have seen a lot of movement in both directions. And also, if we were looking at, obviously, end to end, there's about 1.89 to liquidate shorts and about 1.5 to liquidate longs. But if we look at where it's at, obviously there's a decent chunk about to about the 62 range, but there's also a decent chunk down to about the 59 range. So, I do think if there is a world in which maybe we drop down to 59, continue to kind of make things look more and more bearish, and then we move up back into the 62 range. So, not something that I feel super confident trading on right now, but this is starting to shape up into something where I might take a trade to look at. Also, same thing here. If we look at the longer time frames, we do start to see a much more skewed pattern towards moving to the upside and liquidating shorts. But again, still a decent bit of volume kind of down into the low 59 range. So I do think that kind of remains a possibility. Again, same thing here, about 59 range. We see that this wall climb pretty steeply. But again, overall, there is definitely a bias towards moving to the upside. It's just, as I've mentioned before, when we look at this chart, I love it. I think it's great, but when, is kind of the major question. And so now I wanted to kind of talk about big picture, where are we at in the market, and essentially going to the question at hand today based on all of the data that we've looked at. And so based on all the data that we looked at, we can see, there's two things I want to talk about. So first one is the current state that we are in, which is Uptober, right? Everybody, and this is what I always think is so funny, is it just seems to be a given fact that it's Uptober, right? So crypto is going to go up. We all know that this is the perfect example that the market never moves in the way that seems consensus, right? And we literally just saw this last month too. September was supposed to be the worst month in crypto on average ever, and everything's looking bad and all this, that, and whatever else. And historically, we can't see that, right? I mean, there's only 2 months that have averaged negative for Bitcoin, and that's June and that's September. Okay, well, in September, we actually doubled to the upside what the average is for the downside. Why? Well, if you ask me, my perspective would be because everybody thought Bitcoin was going to go down in September. It's a terrible time to buy. It's historically been horrible, which, yes, true. Look at all this. Prior to this year, there had been, 8 years, which it had been negative, and 3 years, which it had been positive. And the 8 years that have been negative have been much more negative than the years that have been positive. Well, what do you know? Really positive month for September. Okay, well, coming into October, granted, the month hasn't closed yet, so we don't actually know what's going to happen. We could see towards the end of October something kind of go crazy. But, I mean, October is almost exactly the opposite of what we've seen in September, right? 10 of the 12 months have been positive. The second most positive of the 12 months is October, only led by November. And this is from an average perspective. So, okay, that's just it, right? It's consensus. It's October. Bitcoin always goes up in October. That's what's going to happen, right? Maybe, but also we just saw this happen in September, right? So that's kind of my main point, I guess, that I'm making here is when things just seem matter of fact, it rarely tends to be that way. And so, obviously we are down 4.4% in October. October is only a third of the way over. We still have 2/3 of the month left. We could see Bitcoin take off. That is an entirely possible outcome. But at least so far in this month, we have not seen that happen. And one thing that I just kind of wanted to remind you all is that typically we just saw this. And again, the past is no indicator of future performance per se, but we did just see what happens when there becomes a narrative that is just seemingly matter of fact, right? And so this is the main thing that I wanted to bring up here. So far October has not looked great. Frankly, it would not surprise me if we end negative just because everybody thinks it's going to be positive. And I mean, there's some slightly more macro reasons for this as well. The main one being the election in November, and especially since I think kind of the crypto community itself has made the election so polarized, which frankly I kind of disagree with. From a principle standpoint, I think from a practical standpoint, I think a lot of what people are saying is probably right. But from a principle perspective, I just don't love making technology bipartisan. That's just dumb. It doesn't bode well for long-term teamwork and collaboration on making this technology good. And so that's one of the things that haven't really loved to see, but that's what it is. And that's kind of consensus at this point of if Kamala wins, bad; if Trump wins, good. And so one thing that we need to keep an eye on is November. That's less than, the election is less than 30 days away. I think a lot of people are just kind of waiting to see what happens with the election. And then I do think, November, we could see a pretty decent move. Again, one direction or the other. I do think if Kamala wins, we probably would see, a month kind of on the magnitude of what we've seen in these kind of 4 circumstances. If Trump wins, I think we could probably see something, on the magnitude of all of these, except probably that one. But overall, I think we will probably see a pretty volatile month in November. Again, short term, I don't think it really matters who wins one way or the other. But from a short term trading perspective, I do think it actually matters very, very greatly, particularly if you're doing leverage. So anyway, hopefully this was useful. This is something that this is one of the things I've heard a lot at this conference I've been at this week is it's Uptober, Bitcoin's going up. And whenever people whenever that's just such a matter of fact statement, I always tend to get a little bit skeptical of if that's actually true. And so anyway, hopefully this information was useful. If it was, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help the growth of my channel, as well as getting pushed to more people in the YouTube algorithm. I can always tell based on kind of the views and the comments and all this type of stuff, how many likes and interactions and whatnot I've gotten, just because it really, really does kind of help me get pushed out into the wider algorithm. And so if you did enjoy the content, please do that. It really does help me out. Also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything like that, please do drop them in the comment section below. I do try to read and respond to all of my comments. And so if you have anything that you want to talk about or give me feedback on or anything like that, I'd love to hear it. I do really appreciate it. And many of you have really, really nice and interesting takes that I do really love hearing from. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.